Hello, everybody. I'm Anaji, and this is FMV Reviews. And today we're going to be looking at the film In the Earth. Now, this movie has an interesting production. It was done during COVID in about 15 days, I think, somewhere in London. And the 15 days shows in certain ways. Ultimately, what I'm going to say about In the Earth is that I think In the Earth starts out interesting and then becomes aimless. But let's get into more of it. I do think the two leads, Joel Fry and Alora Torchia, I think they have an interesting chemistry, and I do think their chemistry builds as the movie goes along. Unfortunately, I think the real kind of undoing of this movie is the plot, and it does not help these two actors. We don't really learn a whole bunch about their characters, and there's definitely moments where their characters make illogical decisions to get the plot going, and that's one of my least favorite kind of things that I will see in a movie. But I don't want to just totally harp on this movie. I do think the cinematography of the movie is good. It has these really beautiful nature shots. While the forest in this film is scary, I do think it's shot beautifully. And it also has some really interesting kind of editing mixed with psychedelic imagery. It kind of was giving me hints and moments of something like sort of like Annihilation a little bit. This movie does have some parallels to Annihilation. I don't think it's as good as that film, but it does have little moments. Also, if you're not aware, this movie is a horror movie, and if you're a horror fan, this movie definitely has some pretty good gore and just shocking violence. It actually makes it where this movie kind of has, in moments, a sort of darkly comedic edge to it in the way some of the ways this gore comes across, which is kind of refreshing. I wish the rest of the movie could match up to it, but yes, if you're a horror fan and you're looking for that kind of stuff, this movie does have it. Also, for another positive, I think the score by Clint Mansell. I mean, at this point, if you're a fan of indie horror or just sort of indie style films, Clint Mansell, you've heard his name pop up a lot. He does a lot of synth scores. This is another one of those movies where he's doing a great job. I actually think the soundtrack is better than the movie itself. It kind of reminds me of something like a Tron Legacy, where Daft Punk did that amazing score and it was better than the movie. I think this is another one of those examples. I wish this score had a better film attached to it. Another thing I'm going to say about the film is that, and this is a test for me with a movie, this movie's only an hour and 47 minutes, right? So not very long. When a movie that's an hour and 47 minutes starts to drag or feel like it should be finished wrapping up, even though it still has maybe 30 minutes to an hour left to go, that is not usually a good sign for me when I'm watching a film. But unfortunately, In the Earth has some of that stuff. So I'm gonna kind of go into what I think is sort of the big problems of this movie. So one, I think this movie does have an interesting premise, right? You kind of have it where this virus has affected the world. You have these scientists who are trying to find a cure for it, and they're going out in the forest to meet another scientist, and then a bunch of hijinks go down. I think it starts off strong and promising. They're kind of laying out these little threads that you think they're going to pick up on later, but unfortunately, as the movie goes along, it really starts to fall apart. Like no kidding, it just starts to fall apart. It kind of has this. When I look back on this movie has sort of distinct chunks of the film, and it kind of creates this thing where this movie feels like a bunch of different movie genres kind of all thrown in together. You kind of have, like drama, some dark comedy, you have horror, you have body horror, you have like psychedelic stuff going on. But I think the problem, and I don't usually have a problem with that. I encourage film directors to experiment and to mix genres together. But it's not great when it doesn't feel like it seamlessly blends together, when it feels like just distinct genre chunks. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, I think the plot, like a lot of movies, unfortunately, undoes this film. It doesn't seem like they really knew where this movie was going. And one of the things I've seen sort of in that art house, especially art horror stuff, that I am not a huge fan of is ambiguity. Now, I'm not saying that you need to spell everything out for your audience. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't really like films that do that either. But there's a difference between breadcrumbs mixed with ambiguity, where if you're paying attention, you can kind of fill in the holes. They're just not telling you all the stuff. And then just movies where it almost feels like even the person creating or writing it doesn't really know what they're trying to say either. I would ultimately say this movie is ambiguous in ways that hurt it, right? Like the characters, you don't really get to know a lot about the characters, which isn't great because there's little moments with some of the characters where you're thinking, oh, maybe this is going to lead to something more. It doesn't. And ultimately, I would say what really hurts this film is the ending. What this movie ultimately culminates when you're crafting your movie, if your ending is not strong, it can pretty much tank your whole film. And unfortunately, this movie already wasn't having a lot going on, and then to have the ending or not even really be an ending, it ultimately left me kind of empty. So I would say ultimately Within the Earth, I think it starts off interesting and then unfortunately becomes aimless. And with that, I'm going to give In the Earth a 6 out of 10. So hey, if you dug this review, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I'll talk to y'all later.